Okay, I'm really going to get started. Of all of the webinars I've done so far, this one has me the most nervous just because when I teach this, it's very interactive and very heavily discussion based. So I do hope that you will all pipe in with your comments and questions and suggestions because we're here to learn from one another, and I certainly do not have all the answers. But I want to talk about assessment with CodeSpace. Just a couple reminders. The main links that you are going to want to save are obviously our website is where you can find any of these things, but I keep the teacher resources pinned at the top of my screen pretty much all the time. The support articles are very helpful, especially when you're talking about onboarding. And then of course, CodeSpace itself is at make.fairylabs.com. So all of those are very handy to have, and we'll talk more about the teacher resources as far as assessment goes today. So with assessment, the thing to remember is that when the kids are going through the CodeSpace modules, especially in Jumpstart Python, less so in Python with robots because it's a little bit more challenging, but when they go through those lessons, that's the classwork. That's the participation grade. If you follow along and do what the instructions say, then you're going to be successful. Now that's good in one sense that it makes the students feel very empowered and they get confident, which is great. But sometimes, especially with teenagers, they do tend to get a little overconfident and think that they can do absolutely anything in Python because all of their programs have worked. But does that mean they've mastered those skills? So when it comes to doing it, I see Joanna's face. I don't have anybody else's video, but I see Joanna's. But no, they haven't mastered that. So how can you assess mastery of certain skills? And that's what today's webinar is going to be all about. So we really focus on the design process in my class. And that can be challenging for kids sometimes because it's unlike other classes where we anticipate that something is not going to work the first time, or we anticipate something will work, but you can make it better. And they like to think of an assignment as being linear, and ours is really just a process. And so that can work for and against. It just depends on the type of students. There are the students that want to check a box, turn it in and be done, and they really don't like to go back and iterate and improve their work. And then there are those perfectionist students who want everything to be just so. So even if it's above and beyond the requirements, they want it to be perfect. And at some point they have to draw the line and you have to assess what there is to assess because it's school. You have to have a grade, you have to have a deadline. So just finding that balance for you between what your school expectations are and what you want to encourage in your students. That's where the tricky part. That's why we're teachers, and nothing like not engineers or anything else are used to just finishing a project and moving on. So I told you we would be using the second lesson, display games, as an example today. Now, you do not have to have finished this lesson in order to participate with us, but if you want to participate, then you can go to make.fairylabs.com. That's the link for CodeSpace. You don't need the share token to do lesson 2. That's part of the free trial version, but that is there for you if you want it. Now, I haven't told you all this yet, but I'm going to tell you now. And I usually don't tell my teachers in workshops until like the very last day, and they all groan. In the teacher resources folder, okay, so this is the Google Drive that we looked at a couple days ago, last week. It's accessible on Fairy Lab's website. It will probably be locked in the teacher dashboard sometime in the near future. This is something that we keep talking about. Again, it's finding a balance between providing our resources to teachers easily, but also not having everything unlocked out there on the internet to be found. But in Jumpstart Python, there is a folder called Answer Key Programs. And this is a document of every step along the way, on every page, what your screen should look like. And this came because of a teacher request. She happened to have a gifted middle school class that she only saw her students like once every 2 weeks, and they were all at different places. And it's very hard when you're trying to help a student and you jump in and you're like, where are you in this project? And you kind of have to go back a couple steps and forward a couple steps to figure out where they are. So this is supposed to alleviate that stress for you. If you've not completed lesson 2 and you want to participate with us today, you can go to the last one and just copy and paste this into CodeSpace. And then you're done. Now you haven't learned that lesson, but you're done. So if I go to CodeSpace, here I am. Let me make this reflect that. Okay, so this is the point we are with the display game. If you've not done this, what it does when it runs is it says 3, 2, 1. Am I pressing button A or button B? I think I'm pressing button A. And when it's done, it scrolls either a t-shirt if you win, or how many button presses if you had 9 or lower. Okay, so even just this condition here, for some students, understanding that X greater than 9 means 10 or higher and 9 or lower is losing, like that blows some of their minds, just that condition. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but. So that time I only pressed it 3 times, so it should give me my score. I couldn't see whether it did or not. So understanding what this program does is the first part. That's what's required in the lesson. However, this is a good time to go and talk about the user experience. So if I go back to this design process, now this isn't really a problem that we're facing because it's a game, okay? But this is where I introduce it to students and just start with, okay, here is the design process. All right, so what's a problem? Well, you could say one of the problems is if you get 10 or more button clicks, you don't know how many you got. Or you might say, well, it only scrolls once, and then I don't know what my score is if I missed it, so that's a problem. So you can think about some of those problems, even though they're not like real problems, they're game problems, but it has to do with the user experience. So the original success criteria was to, I'm looking at the bottom, program a push button to make a fast click game. That's the very last part of lesson 2. So for a remix, you're going to take what you've learned and make it more applicable to what you need. So I always modeled remix projects for my students using this one because it was a little more structured and we could all do the same thing. So I told them to pick at least 2. And for the record, I let them generate this list of suggestions. As many times as I've done this, these are the suggestions I always get every time. But I was always big on if my students came up with a suggestion that fit the criteria that I was looking for, then absolutely you want them to make it their own. But these were some of the suggestions. Scroll the player's name before their score. If you win, you get a t-shirt. If you lose, it'll show an X or like the ghost. Show the score, win or lose. Scroll the score on a forever loop. Scroll 3, 2, 1 instead of show 3, 2, 1. Most of those things you have already learned how to do just by completing the first 2 lessons in CodeSpace. The only one that you really haven't done is scroll the score on a forever loop, but that is in your toolbox. So you just have to do a little bit of searching. And kids are willing to search for solutions like that if it's a game or if it's something that they want to do. They don't want to search for an answer if it feels like work, but it's a game. It doesn't feel like work to them. So I tell them to choose at least 2. This is where some of that differentiation comes in. I've had students in my class who had an IEP and their reading level wasn't even, a 5th grade reading level. If they never got to the remix challenge, but they completed just the game, that was a huge win for them. That's all that they needed to do. If I had a kid who finished the entire lesson in a day, and then completed the two of the success criteria in another 30 minutes, I might say, okay, why don't you do all of them? So you can make it more challenging for those students who need it, and you can eliminate having too many options for those who don't need it. So use some of that. And again, I don't normally say give more work to kids who need challenge. That's like the last thing I would do. But again, it doesn't feel like work to them. And if they don't want to do all of them because they don't want to do more, then challenge them to complete a different game. Maybe even just pressing button B or showing different images, but they can challenge themselves. So basically, that's what I would do. Now I want to show you how I would integrate this in Google Classroom. If you participated in our webinar on Google Classroom, then you already have access to this. If you didn't, I'm gonna put this in the chat box for you real quick, maybe. Keep in mind, again, if you are using your school email, you may not be able to join Google Classroom depending on the restrictions that your school district has set up. It is very common for school districts to block anyone in your domain from joining a class in another domain. Oh, I just saw Terrence. Ah. Joanna, do you want, I think I have to do it. Hold on. I don't want him to miss it. Probably got an email for that when I was already in here. Probably, because I was ignoring my email. I put it on Do Not Disturb. Sorry, Terrence. So in Google Classroom, I would have a topic for remix projects. And in the project, I would do a view only with the rubric, same one that you're looking at, so the students could see it. Here's the success criteria, and then here's what I'm grading them on. Now, in a regular classroom, what I would tell them is when you are finished, submit your code in Google Classroom. So remember, when you make a program, it's a doc, so they could just attach that document to the project and turn it in. And then when I was ready, I would call them to me and we would do a one-on-one conference, and I would say, you know, tell me about your program, explain to me why you show mastery of all of those things. Now that worked for me because I was really lucky that I was in a district where my maximum class size was 20. So I could do that. That's not realistic. I mean, when I taught math, I had 36 kids. There's no way I could do one-on-one or even two-on-one conferences for all those students. And now, of course, you're not seeing your students at all. So using something like Flipgrid is a way that you could do that where it's kind of an asynchronous video chat. You don't have to be at the computer on your camera at the same time. I keep seeing posts from especially high school teachers, like your office hours might be 8 to 11, but the high schoolers aren't waking up until noon. And so you're not even at your computers at the same time. So with Flipgrid, and I'm not gonna make you watch this whole thing, but I do have the link in there if you wanna see it. I just recorded myself going over this rubric right here and said exactly what I just told you. Tell me about your program, show me your flowchart or your pseudocode, what condition did you use, how does the hardware and software work together, and debugging, what problems did you have and how did you overcome those? If you teach AP Computer Science principles, that's basically the create task. I mean, like, there's more to it than that, but they need to start getting used to that. And what I found with my students was the first time I would sit them down and say, tell me about your program, they would literally like hand me the microbit. And I had to coach them on what does tell me about your program mean. And after a while, they got much better at it. And then we could have a conversation. The other thing that they would do is if they change something to improve the way that a program worked, but it wasn't what the instructions said, I would ask them, well, I see that you changed this. Why did you do this? Like there's one where they use the buttons to go back and forth through a playlist. And I said, well, why did you flip those? And the young lady said, oh, I'll change it. I'll change it back. And I said, no, I just want to know why you changed it. And she said, well, it was opposite. It said to press the A button to go forward and the B button to go backward. That doesn't make sense. I was like, that's a perfectly valid reason to change the program. I just want you to tell me why you made those decisions. So that's just showing mastery in a much better way than I'm looking at my kid's program, but I don't know why they did what they did. So those conversations are really important. And again, using something like Flipgrid, you can have that conversation. And it also integrates with Google Classroom and Canvas as well. And I just found out today, I saw this on Twitter, you can do a YouTube live and integrate it with Flipgrid, and your students can respond to the video, which is so cool. I don't know if that's existed. That's really cool. I don't know if that's always existed or if that's a new feature, but that's definitely something I'd be doing right now when you're not in class with your students.
Amber, can I just speak to something that you said about doing the Flipgrid and with the video piece? I'm an AP reader for the College Board for Computer Science Principles. And I feel like that's such an important piece, because one of those elements, if you decide to use portions of this curriculum or the whole curriculum to teach principles, is that with the create task, they have to explain one function of that app and be able to justify like their algorithms and their procedural abstractions. And so having them have to practice that skill with these remixes is huge. And I know as a reader, I would love to see a microbit piece come through that is successful at doing all those things and meeting all those elements. It's certainly something that's plausible. So the more practice our students can have with that skill, the more prepared they're going to be for that piece.
Absolutely. And I did these with 7th and 8th graders who then could go on to the high school and take computer science principles as a 9th or 10th grader. So imagine how much better they're going to be at that if I hadn't required them to just tell me about your project. And then the other benefit of it is if you think about those ELA standards, especially for speaking and justifying, you're hitting so many of those standards. And, you know, 2 of my best teacher friends are English language arts teachers. And they told me that they could see an improvement in the students justifying their thought process because I was making them do it and apply it in something real to them. And so that's why, again, I don't put a lot of like point value on just completing the lessons within CodeSpace because that's just compliance. Basically, you're following the instructions. But when you do a remix project, you've really got to think and make decisions and show what you're doing. And so these are worth more to me. And again, one of the reasons that all of these teacher products are in Google Docs is so you can edit it and make it your own. So there is one document that's just all the CSTA standards. There's a document that's all the AP Computer Science Principles standards. And so you can just pick and choose from those rubrics which of these you want to grade. Like, for example, I made my students plan everything beforehand, and the only way I could get them to do it is if I graded it. You might not think that that's as important for you, and that's fine. So you just take out the documentation piece and don't include that. The other thing that I would encourage you to do later, not at the second lesson, but later in CodeSpace, when the kids got a little bit too cocky, I would tell them to hide the lesson panel and start with a new document and just a blank page. They will very quickly learn how hard it is to start with a blank page if you do that. Again, I would not do that on the second lesson, and I wouldn't even do that with all of my students, but the ones who really thought, oh, I know everything, I can do any, it's so much harder for me to start with a blank page, but I wouldn't do that for everyone. So what I would do for my students who just needed maybe a typical level of challenge, when you get to the end of the lesson and you're ready to do a remix, go to File, Make a Copy, and I'm going to call this Display, I can type, I promise, Display Game Remix. that way I have my working version of the game, and now I can just start playing with this. And if something gets broken, I can always go back to my original. And I think that's a really important skill for our students to learn, because naming files, file management, file organization, all of that is kind of related. And that's an important thing to remember, is when your program is working, you don't want to break it and not have the working version saved somewhere. So that's how I would assess my students as far as mastery learning on this. And I am tired of talking about myself. So questions, comments, smart remarks before we move on to phase 2. Let me expand my grid. Probably everybody's videos are off though, aren't they? Give everybody a chance if you want to turn your video back on.
Amber?
Yes.
I have a feature request.
Okay, let me write, I got my pen. What's your feature request?
So like after they get through the basic lesson, it would be good if those extensions were built right in. Yep. So that then they also were turning that in through Google Classroom.
So that's something that we talked about
for the remixes.
For the teacher dashboard, that you would turn those on and off.
Turn it on, yeah, like a hide and show. Like if you wanted to turn it on and being able to turn it on by student, I think that would be really powerful.
Yes, because like sometimes you don't have time to do a remix, or you plan to do a remix and you run out of time, or you plan to do a remix and now we have a field trip, or you know, half of your class has an assembly or whatever. So I don't think you want it for everything where they have to complete it to move on. And also I said that I do this, let me go back into CodeSpace. I do this at the end of lesson 2 as an example, because it's a game and the kids really get into it. And it's a good thing. It's good to talk about the user experience with this particular program, but there are no remix suggestions at the end of 3 or 4. However, once you get to 5, at the end of this project, this is when you're going to start to see remix ideas. So for lessons 1, 2, 3, and 4, there's nothing at the end. From 5 on, there's remix ideas. In that folder in Google Drive, there are rubrics with the success criteria that match and sometimes extend these remix ideas. However, the students can move on to the next thing without completing it unless you physically stop them. And that was something that Terrence brought up in our last webinar, like these kids that are flying through it, how do you slow them down? During the remixes is how you slow them down. Because if they have to, especially the ones that really need a challenge, to start with a blank page and turn off the lesson panel, that's really going to challenge them. And you know, I don't do that to very many students because programmers use what's already been written. They use the stuff they've already written. They use others. They use their toolbox. So I'm not saying that, oh, well, in the real world, they have to start with a blank page, because that's not realistic. That's really not what I'm saying. But it's much harder for a student to get all the indentations correct, to get all the punctuation correct, if they're not starting from something that's already working. So it's just a way to challenge those few who need it. Are there other? I hit, oh, the chat box is behind my camera. I'm like, where did my chat box go?
There wasn't anything when I looked a second ago.
Okay, so that's the end of my lecture. I hate lecturing on assessment. But what I'd like now, since I did reserve the time, is to give you a chance to do the remix for this project if you'd like. So once again, if you've finished the display game and you're already done with this part, you can do that file, make a copy. If you are not, but you'd like to participate, go back. I'll show you again. The teacher resources link will take you to Google Drive. It'll take you, if you just go to the general link, it'll take you to this. To get to those answer keys, It's in Jumpstart Python, the very first folder. And it was 215 display. If you open that, you can just copy and paste it into CodeSpace, and then you're where I am. So once again, my suggestions to make this, I guess this is bigger if I go through here. I have too many tabs open. My suggestions to improve this, that's the wrong one, are to scroll the player's name before their score. The winner gets a t-shirt, but the loser gets an X or ghost. Show the score, win or lose. Scroll the score on a forever loop. Scroll 3, 2, 1 instead of show 3, 2, 1. All of those things except the forever loop you've already learned how to do in lessons 1 or 2. So if you want to do this, I think I might have turned share screen off just because of all the Zoom bombing things going on. But you can share your screen if I can figure out how to change it. Or show us on video, like demo with your microbit. But I wanted to give you guys some time to like talk to one another if you want to show what you're learning, ask some questions, but try doing a remix because it will challenge you in a way that just completing the lesson will not challenge you. So again, you can unmute yourself, you can turn your video on. So right now, I feel like I'm just talking to myself, but I can see you. I know you're all there. Trying to find my pause record. Pause.